Thanks so much for doing this on short notice. I feel terrible. If I'd have known yesterday, I could have emailed you the paper and had it ahead of time. I think this session will do so with us. She is she needs to stay over there. So I'll be posting it. It's taken a while to check. One of our one of our class members, can you hear me? I can't hear anymore. My hearing is going downhill so fast I'm getting out of breath. Um, I told somebody that said a very nice thing about this series that I felt a little like I was an inventory taker in a historical junkyard, trying to keep track of what's found where in 12 caves in Qumran and 8 caves in Engedi, and what was found where. And not only is my hearing getting bad, and my eyesight's always been terrible, but I can't remember anything either. And I thank Linda for sticking in this morning, because our lector is ill today and called this morning to say she couldn't come. And Linda graciously stepped right in. Thank you so much. The Lord be with you. Then let us pray. Father God, if we thought the world was bad 2 weeks ago, it's terrible now. War and death and wounding and hatred and violence seem to surround us. We're not altogether sure how to react at all or where hope lies. But we ask you, Father, you're still the King of Kings and Lord of Lords and the Prince of the nations. Show us the way for the things that make for peace, particularly in the Middle East, where they say we're born in war and we die in war. Lord, help that to change. And now be with us here in this place too. We look over the remnants of 2,000 years and the suffering of 2,000 years ago and the wars of 2,000 years ago in the very same place that there's war today. Show us the way, Father, the things that make for peace, and be with this class, that with compassion and with insight and with caring and with increased understanding, we may indeed tune our prayers to the things that make for peace. These things we ask in Christ's name. Amen. It's true. Sitting on the Temple Mount, outside the temple, guarding the cameras and shoes, which can't be taken into the Dome of the Rock, I sat with our Arab guide on a blanket on the Temple Mount with the big golden dome, while our tour group went inside to view the temple. I've been there a couple of times myself. It's enough. And he said to me, you know, we don't ever expect peace. We were born in war, and we'll die in war. And then he explained how this land bridge coming down with the Mediterranean one side and the desert on the other, how this narrow land bridge going north and south between Asia and Africa was a pathway, a highway for armies in all antiquity. So he says, if one's not marching through, the other one is. If one's not using it as a toll house with caravans, the other one is. So we're born in war and we die in war. He said, you know, it's no longer significant as a land bridge because we can fly over it now. But then there's oil. All the world wants oil, and we got some of it. And the sides are split. The greatest reserve of oil right now is Russia and Saudi Arabia. And he said, so we're still fighting. So we think we were born in war and we'll die in war. It's a terrible aspect, but that's what's happened. Last week, as I was trying to help us understand the environment in which there was virtually no government control over Judea and that area in the early days of the Dead Sea Scrolls, so that there was no way to gain management control, public interest control. You know, when collectors buy them and put them in bank vaults, we don't ever get to see them. Scholars don't ever get to study them. Just people can build pride by buying them. We don't even know who buys them sometimes. That's the story today a little bit. And when I was talking about all it and the wars that were surrounding us at that time, just coming out of World War II and the dishevelment of the Holocaust and people wanting to come home, Jews wanting to come, those that survived the Holocaust wanting to come home, and the Palestinians terrified about being displaced, and they have been. You had to scrape some space open to make space for a new nation of Jews. And it's not surprising that the Arab nations and the Palestinians did not accept the UN partitioning of Israel, still haven't now. Now they would take it, but Israel, so bruised by it all, doesn't trust them enough to give them authority and freedom. It's a mess. Somebody asked me after the class, and I won't say who, which side are you on, Pastor? And it sounded awful much like I was on Israel's side, because I'm talking about the realities of Israel being controlled pretty much the whole mess. There is no Palestinian state. There is the West Bank. But the Israelis occupy the West Bank and have since the '67 war. Now, from the Israeli standpoint, that has produced some, not much, as of last week tells us. I didn't know when we were meeting in class last week about the horrible day before. I hadn't heard the news of the terrible Hamas attack. Well, there isn't a side that can be safely taken. As a college debater, and I was that, I would take either side and debate it with passion. But it is what it is. In fact, I'll make an offer if you're interested, and if you're not, tell me now. I will be gone, not this week, but next, for the trustees meeting at Roanoke College for virtually the entire week. I think they maybe wish I would quit, but they don't have the guts to ask me. So I haven't yet. I'm not the oldest member of the trustees. When he retires, I probably will too. Both graduates of Roanoke. I would be willing to take the Sunday I get back just to talk about what's happening in the Middle East. I've written a couple of our class members who have written about it. And if you'd like to hear my take on it, having been there some 30-some times and studied there, I'd be happy to do that. I'm not in favor of violence. I'm not in favor of terrorism. But I do have patience for the Palestinians' impatience because, well, enough said today. Now an apology. I don't like doing that too much either. Last week I told you I was going to invert this session with the last session that was printed in the back. It's correct today in your paper. And I implied that Cave 12 at Qumran and the Cave of Horrors at Ein Gedi were in fact related in somehow, and that was simply misspeaking on something I hadn't intended to say at all, and getting my facts backwards as I remember them. It does have relate. We're talking about Dead Sea Scrolls here, we're talking about Dead Sea Scrolls there, we're talking about fragments here, we're talking about fragments there. But the caves are not connected. What I just said kind of implied that they were. So I apologize. I was wrong, and I should be more careful about saying what I hadn't planned to say. Now, talking a little bit about where we go. We're talking about the Cave of Horrors, which is Cave 8 at Ein Gedi. You know, at Qumran, we named a cave Q for Qumran, and then a number for the cave number, and then a document number from that. So that's the string at Qumran. At Ein Gedi, it's EG for the area. The cave number and the one we'll be looking at is EG8 today, and it's at Ein Gedi, and Ein Gedi is the most glorious place in the world. At your picture on the front page shows a bunch of bathers cavorting in one of the pools from a waterfall, which is just across the street from the Dead Sea. It's an oasis. This oasis is about 300 acres in territory, and there are a number of oasi. I don't know how you say. Anytime I tried to spell plural oasis, my spell checker told me I was wrong. So I spelled it oases, E-S, and the spell checker can. And there are several oases on the shore, both sides of the shore of the Dead Sea. When I talk about being next to the Dead Sea, you can walk from the parking lot of this Israeli National Park Preserve oasis. You can walk from the edge of the parking lot, which is not very large, across the two-lane road which goes south all the way to Masada and past, all the way down to Eilat, as a matter of fact. It's a long trip down to Eilat. By the way, don't believe everything you read on the internet. You know that already. But even in scholarly material, don't read everything you believe. As a result of that, I would tell you that when I wanted to know the mileage, and I've driven it, so I know the mileage, but I couldn't remember what it was, and I want to tell you the exact mileage. So first they give it to you in meters. You have to convert it to miles. And secondly, the first source I looked up, miles from Qumran to Ein Gedi, said it was 99 miles. Well, that'll almost get you to Eilat. It's 20.5 miles, 20 and a half miles from Qumran to Ein Gedi, and then from Ein Gedi to Masada is another 10 miles approximately, 30 miles from Qumran to Masada. But I don't know where they got the 90. I looked it up a second time and got that same 99 miles. Well, if you go by way of Jerusalem, starting at Qumran, drive up to Jerusalem, and then back down to Ein Gedi, it might be 99 miles. Anyhow, Ein Gedi is one of several oases on the shore of the Dead Sea, which is so heavy with salt and asphalt that you can float on top of the water and wave your hands like this. Look, no hands. And put your feet in the air as well and say, with your feet in air, and you won't sink. It's to say it's very brackish would be an understatement. Some of the waterfalls in the oasis, the beaches are pure white. Why? Because the salt in that waterfall has dissipated out and forms what sand would be normally. This is not one of those. And on your last page, or next to last, look at it with me just a second. Page 8. Now you see the same waterfall with no bathers in it. And you can see that the water is perfectly clear. Notice the rocks at the bottom of it, and it's about waist deep. And no salt forming at the sides. As I said, some of the waterfalls are brackish. There are waterfalls and springs all over Engedi. So there's several waterfalls and seeping streams and so forth and so on. This is the same as on the front page without the bathers cavorting in the pond. It is a gorgeous place. It is, as I said, 20.5 miles from Qumran. 2 caves are of interest. Of the 8 caves there, 2 are of interest to us today. And one is the Cave of Horrors, and the other is the Cave of Letters. Sounds very different. Both of them have to do with the rebellion of led by a man by the name of Bar Kokhba, which means the son of the star, because people thought he was the Messiah. So he was named Bar Kokhba, or son of the star. And it comes some 132 and 70, roughly 60 years after the destruction of Jerusalem. The Essenes are believed to have scattered from Qumran at its destruction, and it was either destroyed in 70 AD or 73. Did I say AD? CE. AD. You can't say in a secular world the year of our Lord. It's not Anno Domini, it's CE, the contemporary era now, scientifically. So, sometime between 70 or 73. Why do I say that? Well, it's pretty obvious that Qumran was destroyed by the Roman legion either on the way down to Masada. That's why Masada, being close by, is necessary for our understanding what's happening here. Masada, 10 miles down, is where the Zealots went to hold out after the fall of Jerusalem. And there they could hold out, and they did for 3 years, from 70 to 73. There are more reservoirs for rainwater in the caves underneath the Masada than there are reservoirs in all of Jerusalem. So that while the Roman soldiers are in their armor down in the siege camps at the bottom of Masada, because they don't dare try to walk up the snake path, that would be sheer murder. So they just started to wait them out. That's the Romans' way of fighting a war, starve a city out. You saw what Israel did at Gaza before they, starving Gaza out, and hopefully to reduce the casualties, hopefully to destroy Damascus. That's another story. So that was a way of fighting. And I'll mention in this paper, and I'll mention it now, on top, well, look at page 3. Here you will see what they call a ravine. It looks more like a canyon to me. Top of the page, page 3. And you see a rather narrow river running for the overflow from the waterfalls and the springs in the oasis running through, and that has been much deeper water because you see the water cut lines forming the ravine or the chasm there. Look down into the ravine and you'll see at the top a black dot. That's a cave. The caves we're talking about midway through this ravine, or this canyon, one on the left side is the Cave of Horrors. The one on the right side is the Cave of Letters. They're almost directly apart from each other. And as you see, that hole looks very high up. The Cave of Horrors took a 100-foot ladder in 1955 for Yegiel Yadin, who was the first archaeologist to look at the cave. A 100-foot rope ladder from the ground to go up there. Subsequent excavations have gone there since. Nobody's mentioned how they got there. It's 260 feet from the top. On the top, there are the remains of a Roman siege camp, perfectly preserved, because they built a wall, and then there are siege camps so big at Masada that you can still see from the top of Masada that they have a whole warren of streets in those siege camps. Well, hot, 90, 100, maybe more than that lately, degrees in steel armor was not particularly a nice assignment to have. And the zealots would throw water down on them from the top when there is no water at the bottom because of all those reservoirs. They had it to waste and could taunt the soldiers. They held out at there from 70 to 73. And finally the Romans built a ramp, took a battering ram up, threw firing darts at the gates, burned the gates, battering ram knocked them down, and they seized it and everybody was dead. But that's another story, and I don't have time to tell you that now. Yegiel Yadin, you remember him. He's the guy who in New York on a lecture tour saw an ad in the New York Times for Dead Sea Scrolls and bought them through an intermediary who was thought to be a Gentile. He wasn't. He was also Jewish, but he didn't have the certain sound of Jewish language emphasis. So he bought the scrolls. He paid a mere $250,000 for 4 of them. That's 9 years after they were first discovered, and the shepherds got literally pennies, something like $28 for them. Why didn't this thing get control? Well, I'll talk about that again. I talked about it last week, how the fact that there was no, the British Mandate was in its last days. It had started after World War I. The Arabs kept picking the wrong side, and they picked the Germans twice. And so after World War I, the winning side put Palestine under a British mandate. It's a long story. Anyhow, this is where we're kind of going verbally into this ravine, this cave, in this canyon, and looking at two of the caves of the canyon, the cave of Horrors and the Cave of Letters. Now, I mentioned that 70-73 stuff. They held out at Masada at 73. Qumran we know it was destroyed by the Romans, I think we know that, and the Essenes scattered and virtually have disappeared. They're gone. They're no longer a part of the story. 70 years later, Bar Kokhba will start a new revolution against Rome, and will also be in power about 3 years, 3.5 years, long enough to mint his own coins, but technically he minted them by overstamping them with his own stamp. But there's a cache of coins twice in these caves that are Bar Kokhba coins. Okay, now I got you started. A little bit about the Dead Sea. That's on page 2. About the Dead Sea, just quickly. It's about 1,000 feet deep. It's the largest body of water in this, roughly, other than the Sea of Galilee, other than about I don't know, it's from the top to the bottom of the Dead Sea, long thing that you can see on a map I've given you here. It's about 30 miles long. On one side is the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan on the east side. On the west side is the West Bank for a while, and then it becomes Israel again, because the West Bank was a bean-shaped intrusion into the area of Judea that the UN made for the Palestinians, because it was a agricultural area primarily. It's about 1,000 feet deep. What can I say else? Well, let me look here and see what my figures say. It's also 1,400 feet below sea level. It is thought to be the lowest place on the face, and the big word is face. We're not talking about how deep it is in addition. We're talking about face level, top of the water, 14,000 feet below sea level, 1,400 feet below sea level. On the way from Jerusalem, driving down, you'll pass a monument, a long thing like people put on lawns as monuments, you know, with names, and which has a line drawn on it, and it just simply says sea level, and you ain't near the Dead Sea, and you're going down the whole time. So it's kind of unique in a number of places. It's been called a sea, although it's an inland lake. It has no outlets, and it's fed almost totally by the Jordan River. And that's the Dead Sea. You would think in its desert-like, dry, what reason the scrolls have survived is it's dry. It's very dry. Dry, hot, it's tropical. Jericho grows all kinds of tropical fruit, and Jericho is just at the northern end of the Dead Sea. And it gets hotter as you go down. And then there are these, you can see from the picture on page 3, these high mountain-like string along the shore on the east side, the west side, all the way down from Qumran, when we saw the caves and the ruggedness of Qumran, all the way down to the end of the Dead Sea. What I started to say, and I'm trying to say, and get to it now, and I'll say it, there are several oases, which I couldn't spell in this paper because the spell checker didn't like anything I did. Several oases around the Dead Sea, which is just absolutely contradictory, except it tells us about underwater streams that run even in places like that, and the waterfalls tell us that as well. And the waterfalls, some of them really huge, as you see the pictures I've given you today. That's the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea has supported villagers. Oh, incidentally, En Gedi is the largest of the oases on the two sides of the sea. There is not a north-south side of the sea because it's like a great big oval. So you have a shore on one side, a shore on the other side. And on both sides are oases. But En Gedi is by far the largest and the most significant. There's been civilization at En Gedi for 35, the Chalcolithic age, 3,500 BCE is when the first archaeological remains exist for villages along the seashore of the Dead Sea. And you would think with that heavy mineral content, it would be an uninhabitable place, but because of the oases, it has not been. So that as a result, that village that they're excavating today began 3500 BCE and continued almost without interruption until 600 CE. And you would say, how did that happen? One of the things they're asking right now, what did they do for commerce? They should have isolated, but apparently they weren't. So anyway, it's a significant place. Tragically, the Dead Sea is drying up. The Dead Sea, historically, for all of its history, has not encountered the 20th century. The land of Israel is largely fertile in the Galilee and in Samaria. Well, it's fertile in a number of places, including the Dead Sea. But it's basically leans toward desert. They can grow oranges in many places in Israel, not just in Jericho. But when Israel became populated heavily, it also became industrial. And the Galilee is extremely so, and so is Samaria, which is largely Palestinian from the West Bank. All that has become agricultural territory, and they irrigate this land that was formerly barren heavily. Where do you think they get the water? Well, from the Jordan River, from the melting snows up in Syria on Mount Hermon. The melting snows come down, feed the Jordan River, and the Jordan River runs 140 miles south till it hits the Dead Sea. But the Jordanians are doing the same thing. They're reusing some land that was once barren with irrigation, and have followed the Israelis in being very successful at it. So we have this network of irrigation from the Galilee down, all the way down to Bethany beyond Jordan, which is kind of barren wilderness even today, and then the mouth of the Dead Sea. Now we get to the Dead Sea, and then what happens? The Egyptians started it way back when, but of course, like we did in the 20th century, we got professional at it. The Egyptians mined it for asphalt. And you say, how did they get it? Well, if you stick your hand in the mud, you'll bring it out pitch black, because that's asphalt. If you pull that up on the shore, or better yet, build a dam around a section of that and drain it, you can dry it and you have asphalt. You also have salt. Both sides, Israel, Jordan, mine the Dead Sea. Now if you stand on the top of Masada, right at Masada, there's dry land crossing the Dead Sea. First time I saw it was 5 years ago. Crossing the Dead Sea with a small lake on this side, which they're saying, fine, we can mine all that bed. Coming down the road from Jericho to Qumran, you will see vineyards of date palms. And the road you're driving on used to be roadbed of the Dead Sea. It used to be the bottom of the Dead Sea. So on this side, the highway, there are whole groves of palm trees, date palms. And the Israelis found out if you bring a truckload of real soil in, put a sapling in it, it will establish in the pile of soil, and then it will tap into the Dead Sea roots and thrive. You see a whole field of pine trees sitting on top of a pile of soil. But all of this is, as it says, mining the Dead Sea. So that's happening. Now let's get to into our cave of horror and our cave of letters, and I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about what that was like. But I've got a whole pile of stuff for Linda to read before I do that. Roman numeral 3.
We shall quote below a long news release from March 18, 2021. On Tuesday, news broke of the discovery of fresh fragments of a nearly 2,000-year-old scroll in Israel. The fragments were said to come from the reputably named Cave of Horror near the western shore of the Dead Sea. The finds were announced with attention-grabbing headlines that these were new fragments of the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, and some of our earliest evidence from the biblical books of Zechariah and Nahum. But more than just remnants of ancient texts, the discovery reflects the long history of the Dead Sea Scrolls and tells human stories of revolution, a desperate search for safety, and archaeological engineering. Information is still coming out, unusually for ancient discoveries of this kind. We know something about the people who lived in this
Keep going. Keep going till that line stops. It's on another page yet. This is a quote, direct quote without modification. The footnotes I've added, but other modifications is verbatim from this March, what is it? It was up at the top here. March 18th, 2021. This is a news release from that period. And go ahead. This is great. Roman numeral 3 on.
The Cave of Horror is one of a series of 8 caves in the canyon of Nabal, which were used as places of refuge during the Jewish revolt against Rome, 132 to 135 CE, in the time of the Emperor Hadrian. The revolt was led by Simon Bar Kokhba, or Simon Bar Kokhba, as he is also known in ancient sources, who was thought by his followers to be exiled. The cave has been known to archaeologists since 1903, but it wasn't until 1961 that it was excavated by a team led by the Israeli archaeologist Yohanan Abaroni. The new fragments were found as part of a larger project to search for new manuscripts, which is being conducted by the Israel Antiquities Authority. The cave is remote and difficult to access, which is doubtless why it was used as a hiding place. Alberoni describes the entrance as being 80 meters below the edge of the canyon, with a drop of hundreds of meters below it. The team who first explored the cave in 1955 had to use a 100-meter-long rope ladder to reach the opening of the cave. Fragments found in the Cave of Horrors include portions of the books of Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, and Zechariah. The minor prophets, or the 12, customarily describes the books spanning the 12 prophets. The nickname Cave of Horror was given to the cave because of a large number of skeletons, including children's skeletons that were found inside. Together with the skeletons were personal documents, a fragmentary copy of the prayer written in Hebrew, and the scroll to which these fragments belong, which was hidden at the back of the cave. Remains of a Roman camp at the top of the cave suggests the refugees sheltering there died as a result of the Roman siege. The occupants were determined not to be surrendered. There were no signs of wounds on the skeletons, suggesting the occupants died as a result of hunger and thirst, or possibly smoke inhalation from a fire that descended the cave. They buried their most prized possessions, including the scroll from which these fragments come, to keep them safe.
All right, I wanted to have that read because I could, but particularly because this is a relatively current news article, 2021. this is still going on. I can almost summarize why do we keep changing our minds? Because we keep digging. And with every new dig comes new information and new things to fit into your original theories. That causes some mind changing. If you look at the footnotes below, by the way, I use footnotes in this more aggressively because it saves text space, but I can insert little fun things that I don't have in the regular articles. And here a 328-foot rope ladder sounds a bit difficult, if not downright dangerous to me. Now I pose the question of last week again. These scroll jars are this big and they're made out of pottery. Inside is a scroll roll of parchment. How did they get up to this cave? How did they get the women and children up to this cave? How did they get the scroll up to this cave that was found there? Have no idea. You could start at the top and roll it downhill, I guess, but then you have an explanation why the jars are broken. I don't know, and nobody knows. But I translated that meters of rope into feet so you could put it in our language. So from the lip of the cave, from the ground up to the lip of the cave, was something in the neighborhood of 300 feet, with a little of the ladder at the top and the bottom that you could anchor it with at both ends. It's a scary thing. Have you ever watched pictures, World War II pictures of troops going down ladders on the side of a ship, rope ladders on the side of a ship to get into landing barges? That just scares the daylights out of me watching it on television, So this is a single ladder going uphill. Again, we think Qumran was destroyed in 70 or 73, either by the Roman legion going down to Masada or 73 by their coming back from Masada. The Essenes disappeared, and this is a war about 70 years later, so the caves and their remnants we're talking about now come after Qumran's stories by about 60, 70 years. Are you following the transition? All right. When I was in confirmation class, which was admittedly a long time ago, I had to memorize all of Luther's catechism, small catechism. There were 12 in our class. I and one other were the only two that ever finished memorizing the small catechism. But the first commandment, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. Second commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. For I am a jealous God, visiting iniquities of fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, and showing loving kindness and benevolence to those who love me. Third commandment is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Fourth commandment is honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the earth. That's the way they were translated in King James' day. They're not translated that way now. For example, item number Roman numeral 4, which really ought to be Roman numeral 5, I see. Roman numeral 4 is, you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God. And then it goes on, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Now, that makes a whole lot more sense than you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. This is the NRSV translation, 1990s late, so that it's a bit more meaningful. I had talked about the fact that the Israelis never spoke the name of the Lord. They always, and to this day, a conservative Jew will cover his or her ears if you seem about to say Yahweh, because they don't want to hear it. They don't want to repeat it. It's a long tradition. So that in our Bible we get in smaller case than the regular type, but in capital letters, L-O-R-D. That is the code for the name of God. That's the way our Bible is showing. In ancient times, it wasn't until post-exile days that Israel began to talk about one God rather than a world filled with gods. So that you never wanted to speak the name of your God in a world of gods, lest another God cast a spell on that name. That was the whole game in ancient days. By the post-exilic time, what am I talking about now? 500 BCE and counting down. They didn't think any longer about any of the other gods being legit. But up to then, they were not mono in their understanding about God. Look now at the explanation that the same article did in the indented things on page 5, and I would like to read for us.
The ancient Hebrew scriptures were first translated into Greek for the benefit of Greek-speaking Jews who had begun to lose contact with their roots. Ancient sources such as the letter of Polybius indicate the work of translating the scriptures into Greek probably began in Egypt sometime around 200 years before Christ. A fascinating feature of the Greek minor prophet school is the fact that the name of God is written in Greek, not Greek. This practice stems back to the prohibition in Exodus 27 against taking God's name in vain. The Dead Sea Scrolls attest several practices for avoiding accidentally pronouncing the divine name while being allowed. These include substituting dots in place of the letters and the use of an archaic form of the Hebrew alphabet.
Now there's a new problem. With, as we said back several sessions, all the exiles didn't go home. There were many that couldn't. They were not physically able to go home. They had canes like I'm walking with today, and it's a 40-day journey walking, and it's rough terrain. So there were those that simply could not go home. They were there for 2 generations. They were grandchildren in Babylon. Some of them are not going to leave their family. So not everybody went home. This is when we begin to believe the diaspora, the spreading of the Jewish people, developed outside of Judah and into the Greek world. There were now generations living in the Greek world who didn't know Hebrew, could not read Hebrew. I remember in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, at a synagogue where I developed a friendship, and on Friday nights went to have her first worship in the evening, the first worship of the Sabbath day. And it was a very enjoyable fellowship with them. And they invited me to preach at the synagogue. And I brushed up some Hebrew, and I started my sermon with 2 sentences in Hebrew. Then I went to English because I didn't know that much of it either. Then I went to English and finished the sermon, and the rabbi stood up and said, "This is humiliating. He says, I have a synagogue where most cannot read or speak Hebrew, but this Christian comes and speaks it." I hadn't meant it to be an embarrassment, and I don't think it was. He was just trying to shame some people into learning some Hebrew, I think was the whole story. Let's move on. The issue was simply they translated the Old Testament into Greek because many, 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 many Jews were now living in Greek territory and speaking and reading Greek. So it became necessary to translate the Bible into Greek, and the newspaper, Garth Werner, has got that pretty well nailed down. Now let's talk about the Cave of Letters. We talked about what was found there. Those skeletons, number one, it doesn't say, Garth's article doesn't say how many skeletons. There were 40 of them found there, including women and children. They estimate the ages of the children. There was one partially mummified grave that they found with a very carefully wrapped child in it, very carefully wrapped in a first century linen. Remember, we're talking now about 130 era, 130 to 135 was the book Bar Kokhba revolt. This child is wrapped in a rather expensive linen, and one hand is grasping the linen. She is thought to be between the age of 6 and 12. There are still ligaments and muscles that have mummified, so it's a partial mummy. Testing, CAT scans and testing sets it at 6,000 BC. That kind of, anyway. Now, something else about the Cave of Letters. There's a cache. I'm only going to tell you two things because, like I said, I feel a little like I'm trying to inventory the remnants of a historic junkyard or something, but it's not junk, it's precious stuff. First is the scroll. They found the scroll back in 53. They found fragments from it in 55 and 60. We mentioned those fragments already. How come it's the difference between two words, explore and excavate. Explore means we came in, we looked around, we looked in all the corners, and this is what we found. It was all on top of the ground. When they went back, because, by the way, they went back to the Cave of Letters and the Cave of Horrors because the Bedouins got there first in both cases and sold precious scrolls in Jordan. We don't know, I'm not sure we know where they are today, or may ever find out. So somebody dies and somebody perhaps does something else well. And so, remember we said they've started a search of the Qumran caves and the caves related to Qumran. That's on Getty. That's how they're joined, but I said it badly last week. They're now excavating these caves. They're doing 3 and 4 and 5 several week digs at a time. And the aim is to get there before the Bedouins do, before the looters do, before they appear on the black market and are lost. There's a cache of letters from Bar Kokhba to his subordinates found in a wineskin. Yeah, it's kind of a cheap briefcase, I guess, and stored there. Now, why have they found things they didn't find? Because the cave is huge. It actually is 2 caves with 2 entrances, but the entrances are largely unreachable in some cases. But inside, there's 2 halls. And then 2 tunnels going back from the halls. Now, this helps explain a story that we read in 1 Samuel, where King Saul is out looking for David because he's heard that David is trying to kill him. And David is running from Saul because he's been warned by Jonathan, Saul's son and David's friend, who finally dies with Saul at Beit Shean and was nailed to the wall there. That Saul is looking for him to kill him. So David is out hiding, and he's hiding in this cave. This is the cave where 1 Samuel tells us, they don't call it the Cave of Letters, we call it the Cave of Letters because there were letters found here. And then the other cache of letters, and when the Bible tells a story, it said David has 100 of his volunteer soldiers with him because he was looking for Saul, but in order to protect himself. But they were hiding in the cave from Saul, and Saul came in to relieve himself. And it was so big that David could have his army in the cave, hide there, and Saul not know it. Saul cuts off a piece of his robe, and once he gets back down on the ground, David says, "Oh, by the way, I could have killed you. You see, I'm not looking for you. I could have killed you." It makes Saul have to repent of his searching for David. It's this cave, tradition tells us. You wondered how that story in 1 Samuel could fit with all those people in the cave, and Saul doesn't know it's there. He's there to relieve himself, so he didn't take his army with him. Saved until you know how big the thing is. It's David back one of the tunnels, maybe. Anyhow, the other cache of letters here is from a lady who apparently was farming, owned a farm at Engedi. And if you'll turn to page 6, last paragraph, you'll see the Mabatha cache dated between 94 and 132. 132 is when Bar Kokhba began his war. And there's all kinds of things about her. There's 35 documents in this cache. It includes her marriage license to her second husband. We don't know about what happened to the first one. There's a marriage license for a second one. There's all kinds of interesting stuff about this apparently relatively wealthy lady. And right down third line from the bottom, where it says 300 denarii. The word there, I had my place in the wrong place, my fingers in the wrong place of the keyboard. If you've ever done that, start typing, and you get something absolutely meaningless. Well, that's what I did. And that word should be loan, L-O-A-N. I don't know what I was typing. Loaned 300 denarii to him by her. The document doesn't say what the interest rate was, but anyway, tremendously interesting material. This is some of the highlights. Also biblical fragments. 2 fragments are found that belong to the scroll that was found in 1953, and they dug to find them. So they buried Torah. Well, time's running out. People are leaving. So I should take today's hit. Anyway, you see some date palms here at Engedi. You see some ilex, some of the wildlife at Engedi. You see another map, and you see the Sea of Galilee as the first body of water up near the top, and that's the Galilee. You come down here, and the blue section along the Jordan River and the Dead Sea is all that Ben Kokhba ever got control of from Rome in those 3 years or 4 that he had. So I think that's it. Oh yeah. Just to say that the digs go on. This is a news clipping that a friend of ours who reads the Lancaster newspapers still and was with us a couple times in Israel on a tour, and Ari and Malcolm are two beloved guides that we had that we just thought were outstanding. And you see it's dated September 7th, 2023. And if you look in the center, she has underlined a paragraph that tells us roughly where this is, but not specifically. And you notice at the beginning it doesn't specifically say where, but read it, it's an interesting story too. And finally, the pictures have their own explanation. Thank you all. If there are questions, come on up. I hear them. I'm sorry?